A millionaire disguises himself as a waiter working at his own hotel, but no one knows who he is. On the first day he entered, he was stunned when he heard screams. Charles Montero, a successful 30-year-old businessman, stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his appearance for the last time before leaving his lavish penthouse. The man staring back at him was almost a stranger. His normally light hair had been dyed a dull shade of brown, his striking green eyes concealed by plain brown contact lenses and a fake mustache added to completely transform his look. He had gone to great lengths to ensure that no one would recognize him. His outfit was a far cry from the tailored suits he usually wore. Today he was dressed as a waiter from the Imperial Hotel, the flagship of his luxury hotel chain. "It's now or never," he muttered softly to himself, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. It had only been 2 years since Charles inherited the family business from his father, and in that short time, he had been struggling to maintain the stellar reputation that had made the Montero brand so prominent. Despite his efforts, guest complaints had grown increasingly frequent, and the financial reports were showing troubling signs of decline. Charles had come up with an ambitious plan after becoming frustrated with his inability to identify the problems from his position as CEO. He would go undercover, working within his own hotel for a full month, observing firsthand how the staff operated and how they treated the guests. His heart pounded as he left his apartment, heading for the Imperial Hotel, ready to put his plan into action. Upon arriving at the hotel, he presented himself at the personnel office under the alias Charles Medina, a seasonal hire brought in to help during the summer rush. Betty, the head of personnel, was a middle-aged woman who greeted him with a weary smile. "Welcome, Charles," she said, her voice carrying the exhaustion of a busy season. "I hope you're ready to work hard. We're short-staffed, and things are about to get even busier." Charles, feeling both anxious and determined, nodded. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes, ma'am," he replied. Betty handed him an access card and his work schedule. "Your shift starts in 15 minutes, she informed him. "Head up to the 4th floor and check in with John, the housekeeping supervisor. He'll let you know what your duties are." As Charles rode the service elevator, he couldn't help but notice how different everything seemed from this unfamiliar perspective. The luxury he had always taken for granted now seemed distant and out of reach, and the grandeur of the hotel that had once filled him with pride now loomed large, making him feel small and out of place. As Charles stepped onto the 4th floor, he spotted Jason, a burly man in his mid-40s with a hard-set face that looked like it rarely softened. "You must be the new guy," Jason growled, his voice gruff and unwelcoming. Without any pleasantries, he shoved a card into Charles's hand. "Here, start with rooms 401 to 410. You've got 30 minutes per room. If you finish early, help the others. If you finish late, you stay until it's done." "Got it?" Charles gave a silent nod, feeling the weight of the cleaning cart now in his hands. As he pushed it away, Jason's low mutter reached his ears. These new hires never last. The next few hours flew by in a haze of crumpled bedsheets, soggy towels, and the strong smell of disinfectants. Charles, who had spent most of his career behind a desk, was quickly overwhelmed. His body, unused to this kind of physical labor, soon started to ache. Sweat soaked through his shirt, and his hands, once soft from years in an office, became raw and chafed from handling the harsh cleaning chemicals. He hadn't realized just how grueling this work could be. During his lunch break, Charles found himself sitting in the employee cafeteria, watching his co-workers with new eyes. Most sat quietly, their faces marked by fatigue, eating their meals in silence. Across from him, a young waitress slid into a seat and smiled kindly. "I'm Jessica," she said, her tone gentle. "First day?" Charles nodded, managing a small smile of his own. "Yeah, Guess it shows, huh? Jessica let out a soft laugh. A little. Don't worry, we've all been there. If you ever need help, feel free to ask. Her smile was reassuring, and Charles felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. As they talked, Charles began to realize just how little he knew about the daily grind of his employees. Jessica told him about the long hours, the difficult guests who expected perfection, and the unrelenting pressure to keep up appearances in a high-end hotel, even though resources were often stretched thin. But the worst part? Jessica leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. The other managers, especially Harold, he acts like we're disposable. Charles frowned, the name ringing a bell. Harold was the general manager, someone Charles had hired based on a glowing resume without a second thought. Now hearing this from Jessica made him question his judgment. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, but before Jessica could reply, a sharp voice echoed through the cafeteria. "Break's been over for 2 minutes, get back to work." Charles watched as his colleagues quickly stood up, tossing their half-finished meals into the trash. Jessica gave him an apologetic look before rushing off down the hallway. As Charles returned to his cleaning cart, a mix of emotions churned inside him. Guilt gnawed at him for not having paid closer attention to the working conditions of his employees, but there was also a growing resolve to make changes. He felt an undeniable curiosity about what else he had been blind to in his own hotel. What started as a simple undercover experience was turning into something much bigger. Little did Charles know, this journey was just beginning, one that would bring revelations and tough choices, ultimately changing the fate of the Imperial Hotel and the lives of all who worked there. As time went on, Charles became more and more involved in his duties as a waiter. His once smooth hands were now calloused and dry from constantly handling cleaning supplies, and his body ached from the physical demands he wasn't used to. However, each day, his resolve strengthened as he learned more about the inner workings of the hotel. One morning, while tidying up the presidential suite, he overheard voices from the hallway. He quickly recognized the commanding voice of Harold, the hotel's general manager. "We need to roll out that new VIP service immediately," Harold said. "Revenue is down 15% this quarter, and Mr. Grant is starting to ask difficult questions." Charles stiffened when he heard his own name mentioned. He edged closer to the door to hear more. The voice that responded was familiar. It was Betty, the head of HR. "But sir," she began, "we don't have the staff to provide personalized, round-the-clock service for VIP guests. We're already understaffed." Harold snapped back. "That's not my concern. Figure it out, Betty. If you can't manage, I'll find someone who can." Charles's fists tightened in anger. How could Harold be so callous? He almost stepped forward to confront him, but remembered that, as a mere waiter, he didn't have the authority to challenge the general manager. Later that night, during dinner in the staff cafeteria, Charles sat with Jessica and a group of other waiters. The topic of conversation was the new VIP service. "They're going to wring every bit of energy out of us," grumbled Gary, an experienced waiter. "And I bet we won't see an extra dollar for all the extra work." Jessica sighed. "The worst part is they never ask for our input. We have ideas to make things better, but no one's listening." Charles saw an opportunity. "What kind of ideas?" he asked, intrigued. Jessica's face brightened. "For one, we could set up a better communication system between departments. Sometimes guests make requests at the front desk, and the message doesn't get relayed in time. We could also tailor services for frequent guests based on their past preferences." Charles was impressed. These were exactly the kind of forward-thinking ideas he'd been looking for. "That sounds fantastic, Jessica. Why don't you suggest them?" Jessica's smile dimmed. "I already tried, but Harold told me to stick to cleaning rooms and stop dreaming about things I couldn't control." Charles' frustration deepened. Harold wasn't just overworking the staff. He was also shutting down great ideas that could really benefit the hotel. Over the next few days, Charles paid close attention to how the management and staff interacted. He saw supervisors brush off valid complaints from the waitstaff, noticed resources being wasted due to poor communication, and felt how the constant stress and lack of appreciation were taking a toll on team morale. One afternoon, while Charles was tidying up the lobby, something happened that left him shaken. A guest was shouting at a young receptionist, blaming her for losing his reservation. "I want to speak to the manager," he demanded. Harold quickly appeared, smiling and apologizing profusely to the guest. But as soon as the man left, Harold's face hardened. "How could you mess up so badly?" He snapped at the receptionist, who was clearly shaking. "If this happens again, I'll find someone who can actually do the job," he hissed. Charles watched as the young woman fought back tears. He wanted to step in to tell Harold that this wasn't how employees should be treated, but he knew he had to keep a low profile for now. That night, back in the cramped room he shared with two other waiters at the employee housing, Charles couldn't sleep. His mind was racing, replaying everything he had witnessed. He realized that the problem at the hotel wasn't just about better service or smoother operations. The real issue was a toxic culture. Under Harold's management, a climate of fear and mistrust had developed. Employees, scared of losing their jobs, were too afraid to speak up or offer new ideas. Charles knew something had to change, but firing Harold alone wouldn't solve it. The entire management approach needed an overhaul. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Charles started crafting a plan in his mind. It wouldn't be simple, and he'd undoubtedly face obstacles, but he was committed to turning the Imperial Hotel into not just a place of luxury for the guests, but also a workplace where the employees felt appreciated and respected. What Charles didn't realize was that his greatest challenge still lay ahead, and before he could bring his plan to life, he'd have to confront situations that would test not only his resolve, but also his sense of self. As the sun barely began to rise, Charles, still groggy, headed to the hotel for his morning shift. He had spent yet another restless night, his mind racing with thoughts and concerns about how to make things better at the Imperial Hotel. While pushing his cleaning cart down the fifth-floor hallway, he heard some noise coming from one of the suites. Approaching carefully, he saw Jason, the head of housekeeping, in a heated argument with a guest. "This is unacceptable," shouted the man, a well-dressed executive in his mid-40s. "I paid top dollar for this suite, and it's covered in dust. Is this what you call a five-star hotel?" Jason, clearly on edge, tried to calm him down. "Sir, I assure you, we'll send someone up right away to address the issue." "I don't want excuses," the man snapped. "I want the manager. Now." In the moment, Charles made a snap decision. Stepping forward, he said calmly, "Excuse me, sir. I'm the new service attendant on this floor. If you'll allow me, I'll personally ensure that your suite is cleaned to your satisfaction." The guest gave him a skeptical look. "And why should I believe you'll do any better than the ones who already failed?" Charles, keeping his cool, replied, "Sir, I completely understand your frustration. I'll make sure every detail is taken care of. If you're still unhappy after I finish, you can go straight to the manager." The executive seemed to think it over for a moment. "Fine," he said at last. "You've got an hour. If I'm not happy, I'll make sure the entire cleaning crew is out of a job." Jason shot Charles a look of caution before quickly leaving. Charles knew he had a lot riding on this task, far more than just cleaning a room. For the next hour, Charles worked harder than ever. He scrubbed every inch, wiped down every surface, and made sure to catch every last speck of dust. Drawing on tips he'd picked up from more experienced colleagues, he added some personal touches to impress even the pickiest guest. When the executive returned, Charles stood by, holding his breath, as the man inspected the suite with great attention to detail. Finally, the guest turned to him, looking surprised. "I have to admit, I'm impressed," he said. "Not only is it spotless, but you've also arranged my paperwork so efficiently. How did you know to do that?" Charles, keeping his humble attitude, replied respectfully, "My father was an executive assistant, sir. He showed me some tips about staying organized." The guest gave a nod of approval. "Nice work. I'll be sure to let management know about your efforts." Once the man left the room, Charles finally let out a sigh of relief. He had dodged a major issue, but deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. As he walked out of the suite, feeling both relieved and anxious, Charles realized this was only a temporary solution. The hotel's larger problems were still looming, ready to burst at any moment. Pushing his cleaning cart to the next room, he suddenly found himself face to face with Harold, the general manager. The man gave him a look that Charles couldn't quite read. "You're the new guy, right?" Harold's tone made Charles stiffen a little. "The guest in 507, just called reception, said you're the best waiter he's had in years." Charles nodded, trying to keep calm, fully aware of the delicate situation he was in. "I just did my job, sir." Harold's eyes narrowed. "Just your job, huh? Listen, kid, I don't know what you're trying to pull, but let me make this clear. No one here is irreplaceable. If you think you can come in here and play the hero without following the proper chain of command, you've got it all wrong." Charles felt his heart race. Did Harold suspect something? "I don't understand, sir. I just wanted to help," he said, doing his best to sound innocent. "Help, huh?" Harold scoffed. "Well, here's your chance. The guest in 610 has been complaining non-stop this week. Nothing satisfies him. Go there and fix it. If you can handle that, maybe I'll reconsider your position here." With that, Harold walked off, leaving Charles with a sinking feeling. Room 610 was infamous among the staff for being home to an extremely difficult guest. When Charles got to the door, he knocked lightly. An irritated voice called out from inside, "Finally! I've been waiting all morning." The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s, dressed in designer clothes and covered in jewelry, her face twisted with clear disapproval. "Well, are you just going to stand there, or are you going to be useful?" Charles exhaled slowly and stepped into the room. For the next 2 hours, he was met with a constant stream of complaints and demands. The pillow wasn't firm enough, the air conditioning was too cold, and the minibar didn't stock her preferred brand of sparkling water. With each new issue, Charles maintained his composure and professionalism, coming up with creative solutions to what felt like impossible requests. He swapped out pillows, adjusted the thermostat, and even went to a nearby store to get the exact brand of water she insisted on. Finally, when he thought he had taken care of everything, the woman's expression softened ever so slightly. "Well, at least you know how to do your job," she said, offering what could barely be considered a compliment. Exhausted but relieved, Charles was about to make his exit when she added, "Oh, one more thing. I need this dress taken to the cleaners and back within the hour. I've got an event tonight and I'm in a rush." Charles glanced at the clock. There was no way he could get the dress cleaned and returned that quickly. But turning her down might undo all his hard work. Then, an idea hit him. "Mum, if you're open to it, I can personally take care of the dress here in the hotel. We have an express ironing service that'll have it looking perfect in less than an hour." She eyed him doubtfully. "If you mess this up, you'll lose your job," she warned. Charles nodded calmly. "I understand, Mum. You can trust me." For the next hour, Charles worked like never before. Drawing on all the tricks he'd picked up from the hotel staff and a few techniques from his own business experience, he ironed, steamed, and meticulously prepared the dress. When he finally presented it to the guest, she inspected it with a critical eye. The seconds felt like an eternity before she gave a small smile. "Impressive," she said at last. "I've never seen anyone here do this kind of work. I'll be sure to mention it in my review." Charles left the room, feeling as though he'd just finished a marathon. He had passed the test, but the effort had taken its toll. For the first time since beginning his undercover journey, he questioned if he really had what it took to make changes from within. As he walked down the hallway, he noticed Harold observing him from afar. The manager's face showed a mix of surprise and something Charles couldn't quite pin down. Was it suspicion, respect, or perhaps something more unsettling? Charles could tell that Harold had taken notice of him, and whether that was a good thing or not remained to be seen. Now, Charles needed to tread carefully. The stakes were rising, and the situation was getting more dangerous by the day. The next few days passed in a blur of activity for him. His ability to handle challenging guests hadn't gone unnoticed, and before long he was being tasked with the toughest jobs and the most demanding clients. On one hand, this gave Charles a closer look at how the hotel was run and allowed him to spot weaknesses in the service. But on the other hand, the mounting responsibilities made it harder for him to keep up his cover. One afternoon, while he was cleaning around the pool, he overheard Jessica, the friendly waitress he had met on his first day, in a heated argument with Jason, the housekeeping supervisor. "You can't keep brushing this off," Jessica shouted. "The pool equipment is old and dangerous, both for the guests and for us." Jason, clearly frustrated, responded, "Jessica, we've been over this. There's no budget for new gear. You'll just have to deal with what we've got." "But Jason, it's a safety concern," Jessica pressed. "Enough," Jason snapped. "If you can't do the job with what we have, maybe we need to find someone who can." Jessica stormed off, looking both frustrated and on the verge of tears. Unable to stay out of it, Charles followed her to a quiet spot near the pool bar. "Jessica, are you all right?" he asked gently. She jumped, as though she hadn't realized he was there. "Oh, Charles, No, not really." She let out a heavy sigh. "I love this job, I really do. Taking care of the guests means everything to me. But it's getting harder to do that when we don't have the right tools." Charles nodded, understandingly. "I know what you mean. I've noticed a few things here that could use some improvement too." Jessica gave him a curious look. "For someone new, you seem to understand how this place runs pretty well." For a second, Charles worried he had revealed too much, but then he saw an opportunity. "Well, I've worked at a few hotels before, and I've always been interested in learning how things work, not just doing the job." Jessica smiled, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "That's really great. I wish more people saw things that way around here. I've got a ton of ideas that could really make things better, but it feels like nobody's interested." Charles leaned in, genuinely curious. "Tell me some of those ideas." Over the next hour, while she pretended to clean around the pool, Jessica shared with Charles a range of creative solutions. She talked about improving communication between different teams and offering cross-training so employees could understand each other's roles better. Charles was blown away. Not only were Jessica's ideas spot on, but she also had an impressive knowledge of how the hotel worked and a clear dedication to making things better. "Jessica, these ideas are incredible," Charles finally said. "Why haven't you brought them up officially?" Jessica's smile faded. "I tried once," she said. "I made a whole presentation and everything, but Harold told me to just stick to my job and stop aiming for things that were out of my league." Charles felt his anger rise. They weren't just ignoring Jessica's talent, they were squashing her motivation and drive. "You can't give up," Charles said firmly. "These ideas could really improve things around here." Jessica looked at him, her expression a mix of hope and doubt. Do you really think so? Sometimes I wonder if I should just find a place that actually values their employees. No, Charles replied quickly, even surprising himself with how strongly he felt. This hotel needs people like you, Jessica. People who actually care and want to make things better. Jessica studied him closely for a moment, as if she were trying to figure him out. There's something different about you, Charles. You're not like the other new waiters I've met. Charles felt a wave of panic. Was he being too obvious? But before he could respond, Jessica continued. It's refreshing, you know, talking to someone who really listens and understands. Most people just do their job and leave. Charles felt himself relax a little. Well, I think anyone can make a difference, no matter what job they have. Jessica smiled, and it was the kind of smile that brightened her whole face. Maybe we need to think outside the box with how we pitch our ideas. If management won't listen, maybe we can make small changes on our own. Charles raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What are you thinking? Jessica lowered her voice. I've been considering how we could improve communication between housekeeping and maintenance. If we coordinated better, we could get a lot more done. Charles nodded, already brainstorming how it might work. That sounds amazing. So where do we begin? As Jessica outlined her plan, Charles realized he hadn't just found a partner in this effort. He'd found someone who shared his vision for what the Imperial Hotel could become. What Charles didn't yet grasp was that this unexpected partnership would soon pit him directly against Harold and the hotel management. The small adjustments he and Jessica were about to introduce would be the initial sparks that set off a far greater transformation than either could have predicted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the pool, Charles felt a new surge of optimism about achieving the change he had set out to accomplish in his undercover mission. The next few weeks were a flurry of activity for Charles and Jessica. Working discreetly, they began implementing minor tweaks to their routines. They created a system of coded notes to communicate between shifts, streamlined how cleaning carts were organized to improve efficiency, and even designed a method to prioritize maintenance requests more effectively. Initially, these changes flew under the radar. Hardly anyone noticed at first. But over time, the effects became undeniable. Guest complaints began to drop, rooms were cleaned more quickly, and the overall morale among the housekeeping staff took a positive turn. However, not everything went smoothly. Charles soon noticed Harold keeping a closer eye on him, his gaze a mix of suspicion and frustration. It was as if the general manager could sense something was shifting, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what or who was behind it. One morning, while Charles was tidying up the lobby, he overheard a conversation between Harold and Betty, the head of HR. Something's off with the housekeeping staff, Harold grumbled, irritation in his voice. They're too efficient, too organized. I don't like it. Betty seemed puzzled. But sir, isn't that a good thing? Complaints have gone down, and guests seem happier. It's not just that, Harold snapped. It's about control. If they think they can start making changes on their own, what's next? Asking for raises, better conditions? No, we need to put an end to this. Charles felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew they were treading on dangerous ground, but he hadn't expected such a hostile response to their improvements. Later that day, during his break, Charles shared what he overheard with Jessica. She turned pale. "Do you think they're onto us?" she asked anxiously. Her voice was barely audible. Charles shook his head. "I don't think they know it's us specifically." "But Harold senses something's off and he's not happy," Jessica replied, biting her lip thoughtfully. "Maybe we should stop. If they figure it out, we could lose our jobs." Charles felt a wave of guilt. Jessica didn't know that he owned the hotel, and his job wasn't really on the line. But for her and the rest of the staff, the threat was very real. "No," he said, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. "We can't stop now. What we're doing is making things better. For everyone. We have to keep going." Jessica gazed at him, admiration and worry mixed in her eyes. But how? If Harold is searching for whoever's behind this, it's just a matter of time before he figures out it's us. Charles paused, thinking carefully. "Maybe we need to be bolder. If more people are involved, it'll be harder for Harold to single us out," he added. "What are you thinking?" Jessica asked, intrigued. "A grassroots movement," Charles said, feeling the idea solidify in his mind. "We'll gradually bring in more employees, not all at once. We'll start with those we trust the most." Jessica nodded slowly, a smile creeping onto her face. It might just work, and if more people see the benefits, management won't be able to ignore us. Over the next few weeks, Charles and Jessica worked tirelessly to grow their network. They brought in Gary, the experienced waiter, Lily, the sharp-eyed receptionist, and even Jason, the housekeeping supervisor, who was surprisingly open once he saw the positive changes. The movement grew quietly, like a current beneath the surface. Staff members began collaborating better across departments, sharing resources and knowledge. The hotel's efficiency increased, and the atmosphere became more supportive and upbeat. But the storm Charles had been dreading finally hit. One Friday afternoon, Harold called an emergency meeting with the entire staff. He paced in front of the group, his face barely hiding his fury. "Unapproved changes have been made to hotel procedures," he began, his voice as cold as ice. "This is unacceptable. Anyone found violating established protocols will face immediate termination." The room was heavy with tension. Charles could sense the nervousness radiating from his co-workers. Just as he was about to take responsibility, Jessica stepped forward. "Mr. Harold," she said, her voice shaking a bit but staying steady. "The adjustments we've made have actually enhanced our service. Guests are happier, and we're working more efficiently." Harold whipped his gaze toward her, his expression darkening. "Are you admitting this was your doing, Jessica?" Before she could answer, Gary, the seasoned waiter, cut in. "It wasn't just Jessica, sir. We all played a part in these changes." "That's right," Lily chimed in from the reception area. "And the results speak for themselves. Complaints have dropped by 30% since we rolled out the new communication system." One after another, employees began to back up the changes, detailing how it improved their jobs and guest experiences. Harold looked taken aback. Clearly, he hadn't anticipated such unified support. This is defiance," he sputtered. "You can't just make changes on your own." Charles knew the moment had come for him to speak up. He stepped forward, fully aware this could shift everything. "Mr. Harold," he began calmly, "these changes aren't a problem. They're a chance. The staff has shown commitment to making the hotel better. Shouldn't we at least hear them out?" Harold narrowed his eyes at him. "You," he said slowly. "You're the new guy who's been stirring things up since you arrived?" Charles remained composed, knowing everyone was watching him. "I haven't caused any trouble, sir. I've just tried to do my job, just like everyone else here." The tension was thick. For a moment, it seemed like Harold might blow up, but then, unexpectedly, the head of HR spoke up. "Mr. Harold," she said firmly, "I believe we should consider their input. The numbers are undeniable. If these changes are benefiting us, we owe it to ourselves to take them seriously." Harold glanced around, realizing the situation was slipping out of his hands. With a frustrated sigh, he relented. "Fine," he grumbled. "You've got 1 week to present a full report on all the changes and their outcomes. From this point forward, everything needs to be out in the open. If I discover anyone hiding information or working behind the scenes without my knowledge, there will be consequences. Understood?" A quiet murmur of agreement spread across the room. As the staff started to leave, Charles exchanged a glance with Jessica. They had managed a small win, but both knew the bigger challenge was just ahead. What Charles didn't realize was that this encounter had triggered a wave of suspicion in Harold's mind. The general manager was now determined to uncover the truth about the mysterious new waiter, someone who seemed to have far too much knowledge and influence for their role. The storm that was coming would be far larger than Charles anticipated, and soon he would be caught right in the middle, fighting not only to protect the hotel's future, but also to keep his true identity hidden. The days following the meeting were filled with non-stop activity. Charles, Jessica, and the rest of the team threw themselves into documenting all the changes they had made and the progress they'd achieved. Sleepless nights, intense arguments, and an overall sense of tension hung over the hotel like a dark cloud. Meanwhile, Charles could feel Harold's watchful eyes on him constantly. The general manager seemed to track his every movement through the corridors, studying him closely. The pressure was building, and Charles knew it was only a matter of time before his cover was blown. One afternoon, as Charles was cleaning up in the hotel bar, he overheard a conversation that sent a chill down his spine. "I'm telling you, Betty, something doesn't sit right with me about that new waiter," Harold said, in a low, firm tone. "I've been digging, and there's no record of him at any of the hotels he says he's worked at." Betty sounded doubtful. "Are you sure, Harold? Maybe he went by a different name or—" "No," Harold cut her off. "There's more to it than that. The way he talks, the way he understands this business, he's no ordinary waiter, and I'm going to find out exactly who he is." Charles felt panic seize him, his mind scrambling for a way out. He knew the charade couldn't go on much longer, but he also couldn't reveal the truth just yet, not when they were so close to making real change at the hotel. That night, Charles barely slept. He tossed and turned in his small bed in the staff quarters, fully aware that the decisions he made in the coming days would not only affect his own future, but also the lives of all the employees who had put their faith in him. The next morning, as he geared up for his shift, he made up his mind. He had to trust someone, and that someone had to be Jessica. She had been by his side since day one, and she deserved to know the truth. He spotted Jessica in the supply room, busy stacking towels. "Jessica," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you in private." There was something in his voice that seemed to unsettle her, because she didn't hesitate, nodding and following him to a quiet corner of the hotel's basement. "There's something you need to know," Charles started, feeling his pulse quicken. "I'm not who you think I am." Jessica looked at him, clearly puzzled and a bit concerned. "What do you mean, Charles?" she asked. Charles took a deep breath before revealing everything. He told her about his real identity as the hotel's owner, his decision to work undercover, and his reasons for doing so. As he spoke, Jessica's expression shifted from confusion to shock, and finally, to something unreadable. When he finished, a heavy silence hung between them. Eventually, Jessica broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me now?" "Because Harold is onto me," Charles explained, "and I need your help. We're too close to stop now." Jessica stared at him for what seemed like forever. But then, much to Charles's surprise, a small smile crept across her face. "You know," she began, "I always had a feeling something was different about you. But this is wild." "I know," Charles said, relieved she wasn't mad. "So, will you help me?" Jessica nodded slowly. "Of course, but now that I know who you really are, I've got some bigger ideas to discuss with you." Before Charles could respond, the basement door slammed open. Harold stormed in, his face full of triumph and rage. "I knew it," he barked. "I knew you were up to something. Who are you, really? A corporate spy? A reporter?" Charles stood tall, knowing the moment of truth had arrived. "No, Harold. I'm Charles Montero, the owner of this hotel." The room went silent. Harold looked like he'd been hit with a ton of bricks, his mouth opening and closing, speechless. Even Jessica, though she had just learned the truth, seemed stunned to hear it said out loud. This can't be real." Harold finally managed to say, stumbling over his words, "Why on earth would the hotel owner be working as a waiter?" "To get a first-hand look at what really goes on," Charles replied, his tone steady and firm. "I needed to understand why a hotel that was once the pride of this town is now losing its reputation. And what I've discovered has been nothing short of disappointing." Harold straightened up, trying to regain his composure. "Mr. Montero, if you had concerns about my management, we could have addressed them in my office. There was no need for this performance." "Really?" Charles said, his words thick with sarcasm. "Like the last time I tried talking to you about the hotel's problems, and you assured me everything was just fine." "No, Harold, I had to see the reality for myself." Just then, Betty entered the room, drawn by the tension in the air. "What's happening here?" she asked, her eyes darting between Charles, Harold, and Jessica, clearly confused. "What's happening?" Charles said, looking at them all, "is that it's time for real change at the Imperial Hotel. And that change starts right now." The room felt electric, filled with anticipation and unease. Charles knew the next few minutes would shape the future of the hotel and everyone in it. The confrontation that had been brewing for weeks was now at its peak, and Charles was ready to take it head-on. The silence that followed Charles' words was finally broken by Harold, who regained his voice. "Mr. Montero," he began, his tone dripping with a forced respect and barely hidden frustration. "If you have concerns about my leadership, I'm open to discussing them. But this little spectacle you've orchestrated is entirely unnecessary and unprofessional." Charles kept his cool, knowing that every word mattered. "It's not just about a few complaints, Harold. It's about truly understanding how this hotel runs from the ground up. And what I've seen makes it clear. We need to make some serious changes." Betty, still looking bewildered, spoke up. "But sir, what's so wrong with the way we're running things now? The numbers seem fine." Charles gently interrupted. "The numbers aren't everything, Betty. I've seen disengaged staff, misallocated resources, and an environment where new ideas are suffocated. But I've also seen the incredible potential here, if only the team was given the chance to thrive." Jessica, who had stayed quiet until this point, finally stepped forward. "It's true," she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. "The adjustments we've made recently haven't just boosted our efficiency, they've also lifted the team's spirits. And it all started when someone finally listened to us and valued what we had to say." Harold shifted uncomfortable. "Mr. Grant, I get that you want to improve things, but these employees don't have the experience or insight to make decisions on how a luxury hotel should operate. There's a reason why we do things a certain way." Charles felt his patience slipping. "And does that reason include treating employees like they don't matter, ignoring their feedback, and creating a culture of fear and mistrust?" Harold's face flushed with anger. "I've kept this hotel running. I've hit financial targets year after year." "At what cost, Harold?" Charles responded firmly. "You've hit short-term goals, sure, but in the process, you've been chipping away at what really makes this hotel exceptional. It's the people." He turned toward Betty and Jessica. "In these past few weeks, I've seen that we have an incredible team. People like Jessica, who have brilliant ideas but haven't had the chance to share them. Employees who care deeply about our guests and take pride in their work. But they've been beaten down by leadership that doesn't appreciate them." Betty nodded slowly, like she was beginning to understand. It's true we've had problems with high staff turnover and low employee satisfaction. The surveys over the past few years haven't looked good, Betty admitted. Exactly, Charles said. And that's reflected in the guest experience. We could have the most luxurious hotel in the world, but if our staff isn't motivated and empowered, we'll never reach the level of excellence we're aiming for. Harold, sensing he was losing ground, made one last attempt. Mr. Grant, I understand your perspective, but overhauling the entire management system of the hotel is a risk. We could lose everything we've worked so hard to build. Charles smiled, a smile full of both determination and hope. Or, Harold, we could build something even better. I'm not saying we disregard all of your experience, but we need a fresh approach, one that combines your knowledge with the new ideas and passion from our team. He addressed everyone gathered. What I'm suggesting is a complete overhaul of how we do things. We're going to adopt a participatory management model. Every department will have the chance to suggest improvements and changes. We'll form cross-functional teams to tackle the hotel's issues. And most importantly, we'll invest in our employees, focusing on their training and growth. Jessica couldn't hide her excitement. That's incredible. I have tons of ideas on how we can enhance the guest experience with just a few small tweaks to our procedures. Betty, though still a bit unsure, slowly nodded her head. This could actually work. It might even solve some of the communication problems we've been dealing with between departments. Harold, sensing he was becoming isolated, finally gave in. I guess we could give it a shot. But how do we make something like this happen? Charles grinned, feeling that they were finally headed in the right direction. We'll start with a series of meetings with all the staff. I want to hear ideas from everyone, from the servers to the managers. Then we'll set up working groups to flesh out and carry out the best suggestions. He turned to Harold. And I'll need your help, Harold. Your experience will be critical in making sure these changes are implemented smoothly and that we don't lose any of the quality in our service. Harold looked surprised for a moment, then nodded firmly. Understand, Mr. Grant, if this is the direction you want to go, I'll do everything I can to make it succeed. Great, Charles said. Now there's a lot to do. Betty, could you schedule a staff meeting for tomorrow morning? Everyone needs to know about the changes coming their way. As Betty and Harold left to start organizing, Charles remained behind with Jessica. Thank you, he said quietly. Jessica looked at him, puzzled. For what? For believing in me, even after you found out who I really was, and for sticking to your ideas despite all the obstacles. People like you are what make this hotel special, Jessica. Jessica smiled, her eyes full of excitement and determination. Thank you for giving us the chance. We won't let you down. As they left the basement, Charles felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. He knew the journey ahead would be tough, with resistance, challenges, and doubt. But, looking at Jessica, seeing the hope and enthusiasm in her expression, he knew he had made the right choice. The Imperial Hotel was gearing up for its boldest transformation yet, and Charles was determined to make sure it was a success. Not just for the company's growth, but for everyone who worked there and called the hotel their second home. Over the next several months, the Imperial Hotel was buzzing with activity. Charles had called a general meeting, signaling the start of a new chapter for the hotel. At first, there was some doubt and pushback from a few employees and middle managers who were nervous about the changes. But as the new strategies took hold and the benefits became obvious, even the most resistant started to get on board. Charles, now officially running things as the hotel's owner, made sure to stay connected with every part of the business. He launched a Day in the Life program where managers, himself included, would spend a full day in various roles throughout the hotel. This helped management stay grounded in the daily operations and fostered a sense of respect and connection among the entire team. Jessica, meanwhile, became a vital part of the hotel's new direction. Her creativity and operational expertise earned her the newly created title of Director of Innovation and Continuous Improvement. Under her leadership, the hotel introduced several improvements, including a new internal communication system and a guest experience personalization program. Even Harold, initially resistant to change, found himself thriving in this new environment. Once he let go of his hesitations, his business knowledge and experience became crucial to making the new ideas work. He even became a mentor to younger staff, offering guidance while also learning from their fresh perspectives. Betty took charge of overhauling human resources. She introduced professional development programs, boosted employee benefits, and fostered a more inclusive, collaborative workplace. As the months passed, the results spoke for themselves. Guest satisfaction ratings soared to new highs, and employee turnover dropped significantly. The Imperial Hotel, once a symbol of luxury, was now gaining recognition for its innovative approach to business, one that put people at the center. 1 year after Charles had revealed his role as the owner, the hotel held a grand gala to celebrate its remarkable transformation. The event was held in the hotel's elegant ballroom, and it was filled with employees, guests, and key figures from the hospitality industry. Charles took the stage to deliver a speech. "A year ago," he began, his voice echoing through the room, "I put on a waiter's uniform and stepped into this hotel, trying to figure out what was going wrong. What I found was that our greatest resource, our most important treasure, was being ignored. Our people." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in as he looked around the room. He saw Jessica, glowing in an elegant dress, Harold with a proud smile on his face, and Sophia nodding in agreement. "Today, I stand here not to take credit for the success we've achieved, but to tell you that this success is yours." Every waiter who offered a suggestion on how to improve room service, every front desk agent who thought of a faster check-in process, every chef who came up with new dishes for our menu, this success belongs to all of you. The room erupted in applause, and Charles waited patiently for the crowd to quiet before continuing. "But this is just the beginning," he said, his tone full of optimism. "The Imperial Hotel has always been known for its luxury, but from now on, we will also be known as a place where every employee is valued, where every idea is heard, and where excellence is not just a goal, but a way of life." Lifting his glass, Charles concluded, "To the future of the Imperial Hotel, to all of you, the heart and soul of this place, and to every guest who honors us with their presence, allowing us to do what we love every single day." The room stood in unison, offering a standing ovation as Charles left the stage. Immediately, he was surrounded by employees and guests who were eager to thank him and share how the changes had positively impacted their lives. Amidst the crowd, Charles found himself face to face with Jessica. With a warm smile, she looked at him and said, "You know, when I first discovered who you really were, I never imagined we'd come this far." Charles chuckled softly. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But you taught me something important, Jessica. You showed me the potential in every person, in every idea. You were the spark that set all of this in motion." His words clearly touched Jessica as she blushed slightly. "Well, you were the one who had the courage to make these changes," she replied. "You risked everything for this vision." Charles smiled, glancing around the room filled with happy, proud faces. "And it was worth every moment," he said with deep conviction. As the night wore on, Charles took a step back to reflect on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. There had been tough times, moments of doubt and challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. There were days when he questioned if he had made the right decisions, but now, seeing the joy and pride on his employees' faces and the satisfaction of the guests, he knew without a doubt that he had done the right thing. The Imperial Hotel was no longer just a place of business. It had become a community, a family, and together they had built something truly special. As the party continued, Charles mixed with guests, listened to stories, shared laughter, and made plans for the future. Every conversation, every handshake, every hug confirmed one simple truth. Real luxury wasn't in the high thread count sheets or crystal chandeliers, but in the dedication and passion of the people who made the hotel come alive every day. The Imperial Hotel had been reborn, stronger and brighter than ever before, and as Charles looked toward the future, he knew that the best was yet to come.